We are talking about something that I know rather a lot about. Thankfully, it didn't go the way that it has done for other people. We're here to talk about leaseholds for the next half an hour or so, and that is because there are now plans to crack down on the leasehold system in England. These have been proposed by the government. Now, leaseholds on new builds would be outlawed if the government gets its way, while ground rents could be dramatically reduced under the plans. Get in contact with us and tell us if this is something that you have been through. Moving from London to the northwest. In London, I didn't see that many new builds, if I'm honest. Whereas if you drive around parts of the northwest where Sarah and I live, you'll see them springing up all over the shop. So people are buying them. If you've bought one, I'd be interested to know, did you get the freehold on it? Were you given any advice on whether to keep with the leasehold? Because we were told, oh, look, the leasehold's 1,000 years. Why would you need the freehold?
Yeah, so what happened? Talk me through it, or talk us through it, because, you're a case study right here. Let's get into you.
But they even went to the point of saying, oh, you guys in London, you're obsessed with freeholds. It doesn't matter. It's 1,000-year lease. It's 1,000 years away. Why would you need to buy it? Don't bother. And we were offered it at $5,000. I remember thinking, oh, well, $5,000 I could do with something else. I could do something else with that. And my wife was adamant. And she said, no, absolutely not. We want the freehold. And she stuck with it, even though I think the house builder and the solicitor said absolutely nothing to us about what could go wrong or potentially what are the issues around keeping it with the leasehold. We got no information about that. Funnily enough, the house builder, who of course I won't name, they also didn't encourage us to buy the freehold, understandably. And luckily we did, Sarah. Luckily we did.
Fair play to your wife. She stuck her ground.
She was having none of it. And if you've met my wife, you'll know that when she's having none of it, you are having all of it.
Oh, I love that. Danny Hewson is with us from 5 Live Money. He's at a housing development in Bolton. So excuse me, Danny. Give us an explanation, first of all, then. I mean, obviously, we've heard what Nihal has been through there, but give us a really kind of layman's version of what is going on.
Okay, so effectively your leasehold means that you don't own the ground underneath the property. That belongs to somebody else, and you effectively lease it for them when you buy your house. Now, normally you would find that when you're looking at buying a flat, well then of course it's going to be a leasehold because you've got lots of people occupying the same space above the ground. But it hasn't been quite as common in houses, though in the past, if you have had a leasehold, you might have found that maybe you just had to pay a £5 here or £6 there, and sometimes not at all. But in the last sort of decade or so, what's happened is new build houses have started to more and more offer these leaseholds. And a lot of people simply haven't been aware of what happens. And it means that when you buy the property on a leasehold basis, you have to pay ground rent to somebody else. And in some cases, you also have to ask for permission if you want to make any changes to the property. And that can include a charge. Now, this is why the government now has said that they want to crack down on this. They want to stop houses being able to offer this leasehold, only allow it with flats, and they also want to help people that have found themselves in this situation.
So, I've just got to say, it sounds like a flaming cheek, the whole thing, to be honest with you. What is the scale of it?
I love Sarah's verbalising of indignation. A flaming cheek, she says.
Yeah, that's like the nicest way I could say it without being sacked. So
you do have to wonder what on earth people are actually paying for, don't you?
Yes. I mean, and also worse than that, you can start off, can't you, Danny, but buying it off somebody as a leasehold, and they'll say to you, OK, look, in X amount of years you have the option to buy it outright, and then it'll be freehold, and it'll cost you £2,000. But then that company gets bought out, and they can come back to you and go, actually, that'll be 50,000 of your finest pounds.
Yes, and you found that there are as many as 5 million people actually have properties on a lease basis, although I have to say that the majority of those are in flats. But the amount of people that are finding themselves caught up in this are in the tens of thousands. And as you can say, it can mean a huge amount of money. And basically the goalposts are shifting for them all the time. So as you say, they can start out paying a small amount. Perhaps they haven't looked at the small print. Perhaps they're first-time buyers and they just don't understand. Perhaps they've not been been given the correct information by their solicitor. And by the time you get a couple of years down the line, maybe it was a first-time buyer, they're now looking to move up because they want to have a family, and they find that they are trapped because the leasehold is now going to cost them an awful lot more. The people that are wanting to buy it from them perhaps don't want to have that around their necks.
My gosh. OK, well, it's got to the ears of the government, the ears of the Community Secretary, to be specific, Sajid Javid, and this is what he had to say earlier on 5 Live about the government consultation.
What we've announced today is really to look at this whole practice of leaseholding for both flats and houses, and just to make sure that it is much fairer than it is today, but particularly around houses. And so we have seen in the last few years the number of houses, so as opposed to flats, that are being sold on leasehold really rocket to something like 10,000 last year for no good reason. And what we set out in the consultation is measures that we could take, but we also say very clearly if there's other ideas out there that people have, then we also want to listen to those.
Labour MP Clive Betts is the chairman of the Communities and Local Government Select Committee. He supports the government plans, but he also says that more needs to be done to help those who are already stuck in these leasehold properties that they just can't sell.
I can't see any justification at all why houses which are built on their own piece of land, that land shouldn't be sold with the house on a freehold basis. I can't see any justification apart from either the house builder or eventually an investment company thinking they can make profit at the house owner's expense. So I think the government's absolutely right to talk about ending this practice for the future, but it's also right that we have to think what we can do to help those people who are in the situation where they can be exploited with unreasonable increases in leasehold charges in the future.
Well, Danny's Atta housing development, as we've said, in Bolton, the northwest, is particularly affected by this. So maybe get you to explain that to us in a minute, Danny, as well, if you could. But you've got someone with you who is going through these problems right now.
Yes, I'm at a lovely little housing estate in Bolton full of red brick houses. There are about 50 new builds here. And Claire Scott, when she came and looked round, she thought it was fantastic. It was the first house that she was wanting to buy. And Claire, when you heard the term leasehold, what did you think?
It wasn't an issue for us at the time because we knew that leasehold properties in the northwest were really common, so for us it didn't present anything to be concerned about. It was only when we came to sell our house last year that we realised that our house being leasehold with the ground rent conditions that it has was a major issue. That meant that our house sale fell through.
So you had actually got somebody actually moved into the house about to exchange when it fell through?
Yeah, so our buyers, they'd arranged for furniture to be delivered. We had builders set up to do modifications to the house. They literally went to sign the paperwork with the solicitors, and unfortunately, for some reason, their solicitors only decided to read the lease documentation on that day, saw the ground rent clause, which was $295 a year, but doubles every 10 years, so that by 2060, it reaches nearly £10,000 a year in ground rent. They told them that under no certain terms could they recommend that they bought the house, that the terms were too onerous, that it would give them issues for selling in the future, and that they would have a duty of care to notify the mortgage lenders, and that would also potentially have an issue with them getting a mortgage on that house. So they pulled out of the house process.
And how did that affect you? Had you already bought another house elsewhere?
Yeah, so because we were on such good terms with our buyers and we knew that they were definitely buying the house and we didn't realise about the lease, we completed on the house that we wanted just 2 days before. And it was also a project. It was an old house in Bolton that needed doing up. So literally overnight we were left with 2 houses, a house that needed a lot of work doing to it. We couldn't get the cash out of the Taylor Wimpey house because the sale had fallen through. It was just our worst nightmare. We just couldn't believe it to be true. I took the best part of a week off work to try and sort it out because I thought there has to be an error here. This cannot be true. They cannot be allowed to do this. There's got to be a mistake just to try and salvage the house sale. And it became apparent very quickly that no, it was right, that we did have that lease and that there was not really anything I could do about it. And we ended up having to rent the house out, literally to cover the mortgage and the house insurance. So we're not making any money out of it. We're not property moguls. All our cash is tied up in it. So and it was at the same time that I found out I was expecting my first child. So what was meant to be a very happy and enjoyable time in life I spent all my time running around speaking to every bank going, seeing if they'd lend us money to help us financially, given the pickle we'd left ourselves in. And speaking to solicitors and press and politicians just to get someone to listen to my story, because I couldn't believe it was true at all.
And also a number of people here, they've got a different situation with their lease because yours has been bought by a third party.
Yeah, so all the leases on this estate have been sold on to a third party. We weren't informed at any point. We weren't told that was going to happen. The first we knew of it is when we got the nice little letter in November saying you owe us £295 for your ground rent. It's due at the end of December. And it was from a company that wasn't Taylor Wimpey, and they basically said, if you don't pay it by that date, you will be fined late payment fees. Very unpleasant, basically, and they've lived up to that. One of my neighbours paid her ground rent a day late, literally. I think it hit their bank the 2nd of January. By the 3rd of January, she had got a letter saying we're going to fine you £80 for paying late. There's no give with them.
Well, we have had a statement from Taylor Wimpey saying that they are reviewing all future sales of Taylor Wimpey houses, and they are also offering a different kind of freehold to people that currently have houses with them.
Okay, Danny, thank you very much. Indeed. Get in contact with us. 85058 is the text number if this is something that is worrying you. We are now joined by a leasehold specialist, Chi Collins, who's a partner in the law firm Collins, Collins, Benson, Goldhill. There you go. Rolls off the tongue. Chi, thank you for joining us here on 5 Live. So what does buying a leasehold property really mean? How does it differ from a freehold? I know Danny sketched around it, and no way to patronise Danny in any way, shape or form, but if we have you here as a leasehold specialist, it seems remiss not to get it.
Well, a freehold means that you are buying the land and the building and all the air above it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that's it. Once you bought the freehold, that's yours.
And the leasehold means that someone else still owns the land.
Someone else owns the land.
How have they been allowed to get away with this? Well, because it's not against the law, obviously. That's how they've been allowed.
Leaseholds have been around for hundreds of years.
Of course. And with flats, you understand it.
With flats, there's problems with flying freeholds. That's never a good idea. So leasehold houses, they used to be popular many, many years ago, but not quite so popular now until this explosion with new builds. The issue is that it's not a question of getting away with it. I think the law allows it. That is still a question of getting away with it, though, isn't it? Because you've got to look at the ethics of this. And if it is essentially imprisoning people into keeping a house that they can't sell because the lease, the rent that's going to be paid, the ground rent on it is going to go up and up and up. And you heard, didn't you, by 2060, it could be like £10,000 a year. Yes, no, I absolutely agree.
That's prohibitive.
It's a very onerous ground rent.
Yes.
But I think the question is, I think people do not understand what they're buying. And you heard there from the lady say that she had no issues with it being a leasehold. She was told that everything was fine.
Well, there's a problem there. Because it's not fine, is it? So if you're told everything is fine, if you go to your legal representative, Chi, and you expect, maybe naively, that they will, as you are paying them for a service that involves the law, point out to you the pros and cons of it. Now, if you're told it's just fine, they haven't pointed out the cons, have they?
No, I mean, obviously we need to look at whether or not she really was told it was fine, because in any conveyancing process, you would have what's called a report on title. So that should set out exactly what you are buying. And that hopefully, if you've got a decent conveyancing solicitor, should let you know that the ground rents are going to double every 10 years.
Right. Well, let's hear from Kath, who's got in contact with us. It'd be interesting to know what she's got to say from Ellesmere Port. Good afternoon, Kath.
Good afternoon.
So, what happened to you then?
Well, I bought a Taylor Wimpey house back in 2011, and I was not told it was leasehold until I was actually in the sales office paying the deposit, when the salesperson then just wrote on the reservation form leasehold. And I asked the question, I went, whoa, hang on a minute, what do you mean leasehold? Because there's nothing in the adverts, nothing on the billboards around the office to say it was leasehold. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, it's virtually freehold because it's 999 years and it's £295 a year, and it's pennies really, and it's the equivalent of peppercorn rent because in today's money it's like paying £8 a year in old money, and that's the kind of spiel that you get."
And even
Sounds like
worse,
they had their patter locked down,
yeah,
don't they, Kath?
but even worse than this, you were told,
Yeah.
weren't you, that you could purchase the freehold later down the line for 4,000, but that increases
That's right.
every 10 years, and it's not from
Yeah.
the start of the lease when you bought it.
No, it isn't. No, and that really was not pointed out to me by the solicitor. So I thought, okay, I've got 10 years, but actually the lease, when you look at it, started in 2007. So I'd effectively lost 5 years already, if you like, of having the benefit of paying them ground rent for nothing, if you want to look at it that way.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
Chi, you've listened to what Kath had to say and her experiences. What are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, I can't defend all solicitors.
Oh, no one's asking you to. That's absolutely not why we invited you on here. A thankless task, that would be.
That would. Ultimately, there's got to be. I mean, there are some shortcomings. It sounds to me when
Clearly.
people are buying leasehold properties.
Can they say to you, you can buy the freehold, it'll be £5,000, okay? You buy the house with the leasehold. Can they put it up? Could they double it? Can they do anything with the price of the freehold? But, weeks after you've bought it, if they want to. So you go back and say, I've changed my mind. I want to buy the freehold.
Well, if someone says to you that you can buy something later on for a particular price, then you should have that written in a contract.
Right.
Or written in the lease. Because if you don't, then...
Kath, was that written down?
No, it wasn't. No, and from what I've heard from lots of other people, these are verbal reassurances given by the sales staff who really do have the patter off, down to a T. And the other thing that really caught me out was they said that you've only got 28 days to complete. And I actually said, hang on a minute, nobody can complete in 28 days. And then something happened, which I call the Blue Peter moment, where she pulled out a sheet of paper and went, well, here's one I prepared earlier, and handed me a sheet of paper with a solicitor's name on and said, we can complete in 28 days. And I actually thanked her. Can you believe I actually thanked her for giving me this solicitor who then was able to do this because they've got a close relationship with the builder and the site. And it was that solicitor that did not explain everything to me. So that's how I got caught.
Well, Kath, you know what? We were in exactly the same situation as you. And thankfully, just on principle, my wife was having none of it and she was obsessed with the word freehold. So she just ignored them all and just said, no, I want freehold now.
Sensible lady.
Yeah. Well, the only unsensible thing she's done is marry me.
Well,
but apart from that, she's
didn't
very
want to say
sensible.
anything.
Yeah, well, I knew I got in there before you got a chance, Brett. I knew you were getting ready for that statement.
Kath, thank you so much for your call. It really
Thanks,
is
Kath.
much appreciated. Chi, just before Brandy's on, Steve's on, lots of people have rung us, but just before we get to that, the idea that a solicitor might have a link to the firm that is building the house, is that unheard of?
No, it's very common.
Okay.
So the solicitor representing the buyer has a link to the seller.
Well, the seller, developers often will recommend a solicitor's firm to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that obviously that solicitor can't act for both the seller and the buyer.
Conflict of interest.
Yes.
But is it not a conflict of interest that would you advise to not take on a solicitor that is referred by the developer?
Well, often,
just to be safe.
Well, I personally wouldn't use a firm that's recommended to me by the seller. But lots of people, because the developer will say, well, they will say we've got preferential rates, and things like that, and so people get sucked in by all the various price reductions on offer.
Well, you heard what Kath had to say. She was thanking this person. She's going, well, thank you so much. This is wonderful. I'm about to make a shocking mistake. Thank you very much for helping me along that road. Andy is with us. Andy, what is your situation?
Hi, I wanted to share a bit of a good news story, really.
Hooray.
So I'm in the process of buying a new house, and it was going to be sold as leasehold. And we weren't really happy with that, and we kind of sat down with the developer and kind of expressed our concerns. And funny enough, everyone else on the development did. And it turns out that the house builder listened to our concerns and have decided to include the freehold with no extra cost.
Wow.
So our new build will actually be freehold instead of leasehold.
Good man.
So
Are you a Jedi by any chance?
Did he have some sort of moment of extreme altruism? I mean, that's amazing.
I know, it was truly amazing. So it's kind of just, if you are buying, just talk to your builder. You never know. Ask the question.
Oh, good man himself.
Because you might have a good news story.
Oh.
That is great.
Brilliant.
We love that. It's so great that we've got nowhere further to go with it, Andy, because you've just given us the best possible
there you go.
news.
I'll leave you on the high.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to go to Steve in Tamworth. Not unfortunately because it's Steve, but let's see what he has to say. Steve, good afternoon, mate.
Hiya.
So your daughter, is this a first-time buyer?
Yeah. Classically, classically in terms of first-time buyers in her mid to late 20s, are very keen, not just to leave us as parents, but to get her own home.
Mate, she's lucky to get on the housing ladder at that age.
Well, and that's what she wanted to do. So she's been saving madly, and she's been looking at places in a large city, and found a development that is being built at the moment. Now we're talking about a flat here, not a house. But she was put under quite significant pressure to stump up a very large deposit for the flat, which she was told that this was a deposit, and there was a massive amount of interest in this flat and the others on the development, and she needed to get this deposit together very, very quickly. Don't worry about the mortgage, because you can actually come through us, the estate agents and the developers, and we'll sort the mortgage for you. And this whole story developed very, very rapidly over 4 or 5 days. And, of course, she comes back to her mum and dad and asks questions, and we're very much old school, and we're asking questions about what's the freehold, why a deposit, why can't you just make an offer on the property, and so on. And, of course, it starts to look as though what you've got here is she was being asked to buy out the deposit of somebody else who wanted out of the leasehold scheme because they'd maybe seen some of the details, and to buy into the scheme. And it really appeared to us as though the developer was actually taking deposits and using the deposits just to keep building the flats in a kind of a piecemeal way, rather than having all of the money in place to build the flats and then sell them. And there was a lot of detail that was kind of kept under the line, with lots of assurances from the agent that it's all going to be okay, and we'll look after you, and we can sort everything for you. And I think first time buyers, particularly solo people, people on their own, really under massive pressure when they're in the hands of what one of your previous callers called agents who have the patter. And I'm not anti-estate agent, but you can see how people can get sucked into these things.
Listening to Steve's experience his daughter went through, is it common practice for house builders, house developers to be relying on deposits to build the houses? Is it common practice?
I'm not a developer, so I wouldn't know the answer to that one, I'm afraid. But generally speaking, you'll be asked for a reservation fee.
Yes.
And
what would be the distinction between a reservation fee and a deposit?
I think that's the deposit that this chap is talking about. It wouldn't be. I mean, you pay a deposit upon exchange of contracts, obviously.
Yeah. But the reservation is a prepayment.
It's a prepayment, and normally that's taken into account once you go ahead with the purchase.
Right.
But it's a reservation fee if you're buying off plan and the place hasn't been built yet. It's just a way of making sure that they take that flat off the market, and so it's reserved for you.
And what's your daughter doing now?
Well, my daughter is just considering her position now, because her experience of this, the issue about leasehold, because she didn't actually at that time understand the difference between leasehold and freehold, and the deposit she was asked for was something north of £35,000.
Wow.
On a 150,000 property. So that's not
huge
Right. Yeah,
that's quite unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. So she's just taking a breath now, taking a step back.
So she's walked away, I presume, from this particular property?
Yes. Yeah. As I said in my text, I think she's dodged a bullet on this one.
Yeah, without a doubt, Steve. Thank you very much.
Well done to Mum and Dad for being there.
Yeah.
Keep the calls coming to us, because they're great. 85058. Cheers, Steve. Also at BBC 5 Live. Sue says, is there a cooling off period after contract on leasehold? Is that the case, Chi?
It's Not when you've exchanged contracts, no.
Okay, so no cooling off period.
Andy asked, anyone buying a house on a leasehold when they didn't realise the implications should sue their conveyancing agent. This scandal was as big, if not bigger, than the endowment policy and PPI mis-selling scandal, says Andy. Would you have much of a basis to sue your conveyancing agent, Chi?
It depends on the basis of your contract with your solicitor, because ultimately the solicitor is there. He's acting in your best interest to buy a property that you've instructed them to buy. Now, all solicitors will be complying with the SRA rules and the Council of Mortgage Lenders Handbook. So, I mean, it's very difficult to, I can see why everyone is concerned and how everyone is saying, well, I didn't know what I was buying and therefore the solicitor should have told me. Now, solicitors are there to tell you what the lease says and what you are buying. They're not there to tell you how to make a decision. So
I find that extraordinary. I find it extraordinary that a solicitor, maybe I've just completely got the whole idea of this wrong, but the solicitor that you are paying to offer you legal advice, surely that is at the basis of it, and they're not giving you advice, or they're certainly not saying, well, here's the pros and the cons of this.
Well, that depends on the level of legal advice that you're paying for.
Well, when the standard person walks into a solicitor's office and says, I want to buy a house, will you represent me? That's about it, isn't it?
Do I have to say then what gradation? Can I have legal... I'm just going to pay you, but I don't want to pay for the advice. I mean, that sounds bizarre to me that someone would say that.
Well, if you're advising on a lease, the report on title would say the ground rents are X and they will double every 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And that could, but from a solicitor's point of view then, could you then say, well, look, this can potentially somewhere down the line end up being thousands and thousands of pounds. Therefore, you have to look very seriously as to whether it is financially viable for you to take a lease.
I think...
would that be sound advice?
That is sound advice.
Right. So,
and that is something that I would have expected a solicitor to advise.
Without being prompted to give that?
Yes. But ultimately, you've got the issue
Come on, solicitors, fix up. You need to start doing your jobs properly. Yeah.
But then it depends on... All solicitors have a retainer letter.
Right.
With their clients to tell them exactly what they are going to advise on and how. So I can't comment on every single retainer letter. So ultimately when these people say, I wasn't advised on this and that, it depends on what they've actually retained that solicitor to do. So if you're saying, well, I only want to pay you to tell me what the lease says, but nothing else.
What? Really? Okay, but wow. So a solicitor would take that, okay, that's all you asked me to do. So even though I have some misgivings over it, you haven't asked me to provide you with those misgivings, therefore I'm not going to. Wow, computer says no.
It's not a misgiving as such, because some people are willing to pay ground rents.
Yes, but they're not willing to perhaps be saddled with £10,000 worth of it in X amount of years. But anyway, we have to leave it there. Chi Collins, partner there in the law firm Collins, Benson, Goldhill. Thank you.
This is BBC 5 Live.
Plans to crack down on the leasehold system in England have been proposed by the government. Leaseholds on new builds would be outlawed, while ground rents could be dramatically reduced under the plans. We gave out the contact details. Luckily, you got in contact with us. Mark in Newcastle was one of those, I should say Newcastle. Mark, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Now, you've worked for a property firm for some years, and please, just explain to us the other side of it.
Okay, so there's a couple of things. Firstly, on the side of the buyer, I certainly think that it's wise to ask your conveyancer, your solicitor, to explain to you all the options. It's like going anywhere. You make sure if you're entering a contract, be it a firm contract or anything on a smaller scale, you make sure, and it's your responsibility to ensure that all the terms meet your requirements. So certainly from that end, it's important that people check with their own solicitor.
Do you think it's important that they pick a solicitor that is completely independent from the property developer?
Yeah, I certainly do. I was listening to the programme. I mean, I've joined the programme probably quite a bit into the discussion, but certainly I wouldn't advise going with the solicitor that's involved with the development because, as you mentioned earlier, they're kind of biased. They may be retained not officially, but there are many cases where they're biased for one reason or another towards the developers.
Mark, wait till it sounds like a tame version of what Steve has just texted us. He says the solicitors, house builders and estate agents run a closed shop between them. They operate together with the sole purpose of lining each other's pockets and screwing the house buyer. This is not new. This has been going on for years.
Yeah, I couldn't but more agree to that comment. As I say, having worked in the property business, I can say that is what goes on. Unfortunately, I personally wasn't involved in development, and neither was the company I worked for. But I know firsthand that is what goes on, and it's the same with a lot of the property industry, where firms are kind of lining each other's pockets, so to speak. And therefore, certainly, I would shy away from solicitors who are involved in the development.
Mark, thank you.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Let's speak to Peter in Leeds. Peter, good afternoon, my friend. You're a chartered surveyor, aren't you?
Yes, good afternoon, yes.
So how have we got ourselves into this mess, Peter?
Well, picking up on the last caller's point, yes, independent advice. I would hate everything to be thrown out by the government. There's a perfectly valid reason for having a leasehold situation.
Yes.
It must be used in communal situations, flats and the like, because you have to be able to enforce people taking out insurance and making sure they deal with the repair of the roof when they're on the ground floor. There's no justifiable reason for having a leasehold situation if you've got a normal house. And there's certainly no justification for escalating ground rents of the order we've been talking about. It's a bit simplistic to say everybody's lining the pockets, but it needs working out. I mean, it's the old thing I got at school many years ago. Would you like to start work on £200 a week or a penny a day, and I'll double it each day? And of course, everybody goes for the £200. But week 20, you're on £25,000 a day. This escalation just has to be carefully looked at.
Is this an extra way, Peter, of house builders making money by selling on the leaseholds then? This is an extra bit of income for them, is it?
It is, but I can't understand why. Well, apart from the money side, I can see no justification for it. As I say, there's a time and a place for leasehold. I mean, for example, take there in London, those wonderful Nash terraces overlooking Regent's Park. There must be a leasehold situation there. You can't let people just place willy-nilly with them. You can imagine, some owner A decides he's going to paint it pink, and the next door decides he's going to paint it blue, and somebody else decides they won't paint it at all. I mean, the place would look terrible. So there's got to be some control, but it's not necessary on a modern development of modern houses.
Right. Okay. Well, look, we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. But thank you, and thank you as well for sticking with us.